The Reebok Nano X5 versus the Adidas Dropset 3 versus the Nike Metcon 10, the battle of the big boys. My name is Jake, I run That Fit Friend, and I'm going to try to keep this video as efficient as possible in under 10 minutes. 4 major differences to note between these shoes that can influence your training and how they're going to feel on the foot include number 1, the midsole difference and how the density of the foam in each model is going to feel. So over here in the Reebok Nano X5, we have a Float Ride Energy Foam midsole. We also have a little lift and run chassis system that inserts up here in the forefoot. Now this is a dual response foam, meaning it's going to be like more of a medium density EVA. So up here in the forefoot, it's going to be a little bit more pliable and soft, and then back here in the heel, it's a little bit more dense. Now when it comes to lifting, this shoe offers like a fine line between being versatile but then also stable for some heavy strength training, and compared to these 3 shoes up here, this is going to be one of the softer models regarding its overall ride. So if you want a slightly softer foam midsole for your training, that's where the Reebok Nano X5 can excel. In the Adidas Dropset 3, we have a dual density midsole as well, similar to the Nano X5. However, it's a lot more apparent where the stability starts in the heel foam. So up here in the forefoot, you have a slightly softer medium density EVA. However, even then, it does have a nice flexibility. It still runs rather dense, and it has a lower to the ground feel. And then back here in the heel, we have a much denser heel. So this heel does not compress really at all, and that is going to influence how this shoe feels for versatility, and it's going to boost its overall stability when lifting, especially when squatting, cleaning, etc. In the Nike Metcon 10, we have a React foam midsole that runs throughout the entirety of the shoe. You also have a Hyperlift insert back here in the heel that says TPU plate. It helps add additional stability to the heel of this shoe. The React foam in this shoe is a little bit more pliable than the Nike Metcon 9 if you've ever worn that model, or if you've worn the Adidas Dropset 3, so expect a slightly softer and more responsive ride up here in the forefoot. And then back here in the heel, it still runs rather dense. And then comparatively speaking, if we go off of density and stability, the Dropset 3 has the most stable and dense midsole. Nike Metcon 10 is right in the middle of the road, pretty stable, but a little bit more playful than the Dropset 3, and then the Reebok Nano X5 has the softest midsole. The second difference to note between these shoes is their heel to toe drops and how that can influence your training. So in the Reebok Nano X5, we have a heel to toe drop of 7 millimeters. In the Dropset 3, we have a heel to toe drop of 6 millimeters. And in the Nike Metcon 10, they haven't disclosed it yet, but it feels a lot like 4 millimeters, which has been every Metcon to date. So if you like a slightly lower profile feel with your shoes, the 4 millimeter drop of the Metcon 10 will likely resonate really well with your needs. So if, for example, you've worn prior Metcons or the Puma Fuse shoes or the Strike Movement Haze Trainer, this would be a good model to match your needs. The Dropset 3 and the Nano X5 both have a little bit more heel. Now when it comes to actually feeling that heel with your training, I actually feel like you feel it the most in the Dropset 3 despite it having a 1 millimeter lower drop than the Nano X5. So that said, if you like having a bit more heel for your squats or your cleans, the Dropset 3 can be an exceptional model to look into. The third major difference to note between these shoes is their upper constructions and how that can influence your training. So in the Reebok Nano X5, we have a flex weave upper that runs throughout the forefoot into the midfoot, and then a padded mesh boot and TPU overlays around the boot here. When it comes to breathability, the Nano X5 I would actually put towards the top end of these 3 shoes. It's between really the Nano X5 and the Dropset 3 regarding breathability. I do think the Dropset 3 might have a slight edge, but when it comes to the upper ventilation, the Nano X5 does a pretty good job. You also have a pretty good security in this shoe. Now I will say with the Nano X5, one thing that you might run into is that if you constantly have heel slip issues in the models you wear for training, the Nano X5 can be a little bit more prone to that. And that's because I believe the tongue runs a little bit short and the boot opening is a little bit wide. So that can influence security for certain foot anatomies, but for the most part, the Nano X5 does a decent job with breathability and security, and it's a good shoe that can kind of tackle a little bit of everything in the gym. The Dropset 3 has a mesh upper that runs throughout the forefoot and midfoot. This chain link mesh is a little bit more breathable, and then back here in the boot, you have more structure and a padded mesh. If you like a little more ankle lockdown with your shoes, that would be something to consider with the Dropset 3. It does a pretty good job at that. And then the upper up here in the forefoot does a decent job with lockdown as well. Now, if you're doing a lot of side-to-side movements, this mesh can lack at times, but I think for most individuals, the upper security should be plenty fine in the Dropset 3. Over here in the Nike Metcon 10, we have a mesh upper with haptic overlays. This is similar to the Nike Metcon 9, however, obviously the design elements are different. Then we also have a padded mesh boot back here in the tongue, and then we have this reworked eyelet system here with this middle eyelet being this more aggressive material. It's a little bit more blatant, a little bit more rigid, and gives you a little bit more support for side-to-side movements. When it comes to breathability, the Metcon 10 is not going to be your best model, but the durability of the upper of this shoe from abrasion has been really good thus far. And if you do a lot of side-to-side stuff, that's also where I think this shoe can excel, because with that lower profile upper, with its heavier overlays, it is going to give you a little bit better lockdown than the Dropset 3 and the Nano X5 regarding really aggressive side-to-side or power-focused movements. The fourth major difference to note between these shoes is their overall fit and just general comfort. In the Metcon 10, we do have a slightly wider forefoot here, but then a pretty aggressive taper through the forefoot. So if you have a blockier foot, you will want to consider that with this shoe, in my opinion. You might feel a little bit cramped up here towards the pinky toe. I do think it's going to work for foot anatomies from like 2E foot width and down. And then we also have a decently aggressive arch in this shoe. And now all of these shoes do have a fairly pronounced arch, so you will want to consider that for my folks out there who don't like any form of arch pressing into their medial midfoot. But all that to say, if you like the more athletic feeling fit of Nike shoes and a little bit more of a low profile upper and then lower boot, that would be something to consider with the Nike Metcon 10. I feel like it'll work really well for you. It almost feels like a cleat at times, in my opinion, when it's on the foot. The Dropset 3 has a fit and feel that's a lot more similar to a weightlifting shoe. So we have this heel that juts out here, which makes it great for lifting. But when it comes to the midfoot support and toe box, it's what I would call like a middle of the road shoe. It should work for 2E foot widths and down. And similar to the Nike Metcon 10, if you have a really blocky foot, you might run again into that spillover issue up here or have that synthetic overlay pressed into the toe. So you will want to consider that. Also, this model's arch is pretty aggressive, and that's not really going to break in over time. So if you need a slightly more toned down arch, the Nano X5 and Metcon 10 might be a little bit better, but it is going to be very hit or miss. So keep your shoe in good condition if you're worried and you might need to return them. But width-wise, both shoes are pretty comparable. I would have to probably give the edge to the Metcon 10 just because the base of the forefoot is slightly wider than the Dropset 3, but the Dropset 3's toe box isn't as aggressive with a taper, so it is kind of a give and take there. In the Nano X5, you have a fairly aggressive arch here, and you have the narrowest toe box up here. And so that said, if you're somebody who has a medium width foot or an E width foot and you like some arch support, the Nano X5 can be a really good option for your overall need. But now let's do a quick performance comparison with these three shoes. My performance comparison, and I promise under 10 minutes I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to fly through this. I have individual reviews on all these shoes, so definitely check those out if you need more context. Which model is going to be better for lifting? So the top dogs up here include the Dropset 3 and the Nike Metcon 10. How I would characterize these in the sense of lifting is that if you want a shoe that feels more like a weightlifting shoe, a more pronounced heel, very stable for squats and doing cleans and anything where you're gonna be catching weight, the Dropset 3 can be an awesome option. If you want a shoe that's a little bit more athletic in my opinion, and it'll work really great for CrossFit and heavy lifting, the Metcon 10 is taking the edge here. So both shoes can be exceptional for heavier lifting. The Nano X5 can also be an awesome option. It's just not necessarily at the same level of stability regarding midsole density compared to these two, but in the Nano X5, I've trained up to 500 with deadlifts and have been fine, so I wouldn't necessarily stress the overall stability of either of these shoes, especially for the recreational gym goer. Now, which model is better for CrossFit? Honestly, that's where I'm going to give the edge to the Nike Metcon 10. I do feel like it takes the edge here for being just the most durable, and I tread lightly when I say well-rounded for CrossFit, but I do think the Metcon 10 is back, whereas the 9 was very stable. It kind of fell short. This model is a little bit more versatile, so I will have to give the edge there. The Dropset 3 works exceptionally well. It's not necessarily built for CrossFit, but a lot of people use them for CrossFit and love them. If your gym programs a lot of squats and a lot of weightlifting movements and you don't feel like getting additional weightlifting shoes, that's where I think the Dropset 3 can make a lot of sense. And then the Nano X5 can also be a good option if your gym programs a little bit more versatility regarding their WODs. So think shorter runs or workouts where you're jumping a lot. Now, which model is better for cross training? That's where I'm going to give the edge to the Nano X5 and the Metcon 10. If you like a more low profile feel with your training shoe and you're going to be primarily on the forefoot, the Metcon 10 can be an awesome option. And then if you want something that's a little bit more well-rounded with its fit and feel for HIIT, classes, etc., the Nano X5 can be a great option. The Dropset 3 can work, however, if you're not primarily on the forefoot or if you just want a little bit more cushion and comfort, that's where this shoe is going to start to fall short. Now, which model is better for short runs? The Nano X5 is taking the win here. The Dropset 3 is the least comfortable. You can probably get 4 to 6, maybe 800 meters in this shoe if you're primarily a forefoot striker and you're doing intervals, but again, it's pretty uncomfortable and pretty dense. In the Metcon 10, similarly, anywhere from 400 to 1200 meters will be the sweet spot in the shoe, especially for my forefoot strikers. The heel in this model can feel pretty dang aggressive, so keep that in mind. It's definitely better than the 7, 8, and 9, but it is still a really stable shoe that's not going to really deliver for a short runs context. Which model is better for daily wear? Nano X5 is again taking the edge. With the heels here in the Metcon 10 and the Dropset 3, they're just not very comfortable. And then also in the Dropset 3, you have the cutout here. So we've talked about this in many videos, but water can seep in there for my folks who want these for daily wear. So all that to say, Nano X5 is also taking the edge here if you want a shoe for just walking around and being on your feet all day. All right, so now let's cover some weight, heel, toe drop, and insole differences in the Metcon 10, Dropset 3, and Nano X5. All of these shoes are a size 10 US. In the Metcon 10, we have a weight of 11.90 ounces. In the Nano X5, we have a weight of 13.35 ounces. And then here in the Dropset 3, we have a weight of 12.90 ounces. When it comes to heel to toe drops, the Nano X5 has a 7mm drop. The Dropset 3 has a drop of 6mm. And then in the Metcon 10, you can once again expect a 4mm drop. All these shoes have thin foam removable insoles, but if you have custom orthotics and inserts, you will likely want to go with the Dropset 3 or the Nano X5. They're going to give you a little bit more upper volume, whereas in the Metcon 10, you will be a little bit limited up here in the forefoot regarding overall volume. All right, so now let's go over some sizing and fit differences between these three shoes. Now, I have an E to double E width foot and a normal arch. I traditionally size in a 10 US with all the shoes I review, and I purposely buy 10s to make sure I can give you proper context with how I interpret different sizes and fits. In all of these shoes for narrow, medium, and E to 2E foot widths, you should be okay going true to size. Now that said, if you have a 2E plus foot width and you do want to try one of these shoes, honestly with all three, I would say potentially go up a half size. When it comes to sheer toe box width, the Metcon 10 is going to give you the widest base at the forefoot, and then the Dropset 3 is going to be a little bit wider towards the end of the toe box. However, the Metcon 10 and the Dropset 3 are pretty dang close. The Nano X5 has the narrowest toe box and the most aggressive taper through the midfoot. Now when it comes to arches and how they feel on the feet, I notice the arch most in the Dropset 3 and the Metcon 10. The Nano X5 is also pretty dang aggressive, but I feel like with this knit, it does break in a little bit better and it gives you a little bit more spillover. Now the Metcon 10 will feel like it's pretty aggressive out of the box, but it does break in after about a week, so expect that. The Dropset 3 on the other hand, not so much. That model is gonna feel like it has an arch to it no matter what and for how long you train. I have yet to have this shoe feel like it's broken in regarding that. So if you have a flatter foot or if you just don't love any form of arch at all in your training shoes, you will want to consider that. But all that to say, narrow, medium, E, and sometimes 2E foot widths should be safe going true to size in these shoes. If you have 3E or 2E plus foot widths and you just want more toe box room, go up a half size, but do keep in mind that with all of these shoes, you will want to keep them in good condition in the event you need to return them. All right, guys, that wraps up my breakdown of the Nano X5, Dropset 3, and Metcon 10. If you have additional questions on any of these shoes or which is best for you, drop a comment down below or hit me up on Instagram, whichever you prefer. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one.